It's always, for me, I hope it is for you, so interesting to get to go through the accounts and pick out these not only little bitty details that make the Gospels very rich, that show you why each writer is important, but also that teach a lesson. One of these little details that comes up in Luke chapter 4, beginning in verse 38 with Peter's mother-in-law, it says in Luke 4:38, now he arose from the synagogue and entered Simon's house, but Simon's wife's mother was sick with what? A great fever, or the New King James Version says, with a high fever. So apparently the idea, and you can imagine this was not a new idea at that point in time, but they were categorizing a high fever from a not high fever. And we still do that today. I forget what Grayson tells me is beyond where you actually have fever. I think he said it's 101. And I don't know if that's at the point where it's official or that's where he begins to care. So I think he would tell me if his patients are up to 100.9, doesn't really care, but after that he starts paying attention. I can't remember if it's official or if it was just his little rule, but we understand that some fevers aren't that significant while others are, and it's all based on, of course, what the actual temperature is. What does that show us about Luke? He was a physician. He was a physician. Just these little details that show us Luke was indeed a physician. And they made request of him concerning her. And he stood over her and he did what? Rebuked the fever. So, and then immediately she arose and served them. And that was so interesting, the approach that he uses, because sometimes nothing is ever said. Sometimes an address would have been made, say, to Peter, your mother-in-law is well. But in this instance, what does he do? He addresses the ailment. He rebukes the fever, like last week in our sermon. He rebukes the what? We haven't gotten there in the Bible study, but we talked about it in the sermon last week. He rebukes what? The winds and the waves. Well, he rebukes this fever. And it just what? It just goes away. It didn't have to what? Again, I do have to balance sounding like a broken record, but there are very important points to be made, especially when we're only, are we 1 week out from Miracle Night at Clawson? Did I show y'all that last Sunday? Or was it Sunday before last? It was October 26th. It was Sunday night before last. Miracle Night at Clawson, October 26th. Okay? So, when did this fever go away? Immediately. It didn't have to what? It didn't have to go down. It didn't have to just gradually go away. Lots of people get healed from the flu on Sunday. They come back the next Sunday, and praise and glory and honor is given to God because now they're better. I would kindly suggest that if anyone waited a week, what's likely to happen with the flu? It's probably going to go away. It's probably going to go away. This fever left immediately. So much so, and you can see this in the gospel account. So much so, what happens in verse 40? What happens? You know, now think about this. If her fever would have been really high, and he would have healed her, but it would have really just been an illusion, and she kept a fever for another week or two, what would everyone have said? She got better on her own. I'm not going to what? Why should I get out of bed if Jesus has come through, healed her, it took her 2 weeks, I can lay in bed and I can be better in how long? In 2 weeks. Why am I getting out of bed for this? I'm sick. You see from the reaction in verse 40, people did what? They knew this was not what? This was not normal. This had not, they weren't used to seeing this. So, when the sun was setting, all of those who had any that were sick with various diseases brought them to him. He laid his hands on every one of them and healed them. Now, this is one of these statements, and we've got a few of them kind of stuck here and there. We're going to see one, for example, in the temple in the last week of Jesus' life. How many miracles did I say that it records Jesus doing? Do you remember the number when we got to turning the water into wine in John 2? I told you the number of miracles. It's somewhat similar to the number of parables. There's 30 parables and there's about 35 miracles. But obviously, according to Luke chapter 44, verse 40, obviously what is taking place. A lot is being done, and that's why, you go to John chapter 20, and John only brings up 8 of them, but John 20 says there's a lot more. Well, not only did John leave a lot of them out, but even the gospel writers can't what? Right, even they can't catalog all of them. And even in verse 41, now this was an additional, even in verse 41, and demons also came out of many, crying out and saying what? You are the Christ, the Son of God. And he, rebuking them, did not allow them to speak, for they knew what? They knew he was the Christ. How did they know he was the Christ? Yeah, well, certainly. And how else could they know he was the Christ? Where did the demons live? Live's a bad word, but I chose it intentionally. Where did the demons live? So demons lived in the same sphere of existence as who? As Jesus. Not the same place, but the same realm of existence. So, this is really weird to say, but if anyone's going to know who Jesus was, it would be who? It would actually be the demons. And what did they readily do? Clearly, they readily acknowledged the fact that he was indeed the Christ, the Son of the living God. And we've still got people today. And that's being kind, because kind of, sort of, how many people do we have today who still won't acknowledge Jesus Christ as the Son of the living God? How many people? What? Christianity, again, think about it. Christianity, in the broadest definition, make up how many people in the world? In the broadest way, how many people does it make up? How many? Charles, it's not even that much. It's about 1/4 of the people in the world. So there's 8 billion people in the world. The large umbrella is, the last I saw, which wasn't terribly long ago, was a little over 2 billion. So you're somewhere around a quarter of the people on earth believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And here were the demons, I mean, again, readily saying that it was so. It's really unbelievable in an extent to think about it. Demons acknowledging it, and we can't, try as we might, we can't get people on the earth to acknowledge it. Anyway, okay, this picture here, ruins of Capernaum, and part of the ruins that were considered of the synagogue being just right close to the traditional site of Peter's mother-in-law's house. So the healing of Peter's mother-in-law was not just another healing. It marked several items that were worthy of us noting. Okay, now what is, though, interesting is that this comes to the end. We've got the rejection of Nazareth and the new home in Capernaum. So now what we're going to do is transition and go to the next section that's in this larger Galilean ministry and look at the first tour of Galilee. So over the next however many Sundays it takes us, we're going to look at this first tour of Galilee. And this first tour is likely going to last something about 4 or 5 months. So Matthew chapter 4, let's look at Matthew chapter 4, and we'll look in 23 through 25. Matthew chapter 4, 23 through 25, the record of it says, Jesus went about all Galilee, like I said, 4 or 5 months or so, teaching in their synagogues. And what did he preach? Let's just bring this up. The gospel of the kingdom. So Matthew uses this term. He doesn't use it many times. I think I put in your notes he uses it only 3 times. Yes, exclusively he uses it 3 times, preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing all kinds of sickness, all kinds of disease among the people. And then his fame went throughout all of Assyria. They brought to him all sick people who were afflicted with various diseases and torments, those who were demon-possessed, epileptics, paralytics, and he healed them. Great multitudes followed him from Galilee, from Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and beyond the Jordan. So again, I've mentioned before, where does Jesus find his greatest success? In what area does Jesus find his greatest success? In where? In Galilee. Hands down, in Galilee. John, on the other hand, and of course the gospel writers are going to spend a lot of their space talking about the events in Galilee, because again, it was just, he did so well in Galilee in finding a following. John, on the other hand, does not spend his time talking about what happens in Galilee. He spends his time talking about what happens where? In Judea. And even more specifically, where? In Jerusalem. And one, I don't think I've ever talked about it, and if I have, I'm sorry for bringing it up again, but you look in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and it's just, they love him, they follow him, they want to be healed by him. But you look in John, and it's kind of dour. It's kind of dark. Why is John kind of dark? We've only went through 4 chapters, so we haven't really seen. Once you hit 5, you're starting to hit the meat of it, which we will after this first tour of Galilee. But it's just, argument after argument after argument. Conflict after conflict after conflict. And you really hit it once you get in 5. And it's just conflict, discussion, conflict, argument, 3. So it's heavy, dark. But Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't feel that way, because they're talking about what happens in Galilee. And what happened in Galilee was a different picture than what happened in Jerusalem. By and large, in generalities, of course. But you start to see this, and everything is going very well. In 24, fame goes throughout all of Syria, and they bring to him all of these different people. And then even in verse 25, great multitudes followed him, of course, from Galilee, and then from Decapolis. So where is Decapolis? And if you guys, maybe in a study Bible, you might have it in a map right there on the page, or you may have it in a map in the back. Where was Decapolis? First of all, what does Decapolis stand for? You might be able to kind of pull it out from, you can pull it out from the name. 10 polis, 10 what? 10 cities. 10 cities. I put in your notes, ironically, it was more associated with probably 18 or 19 different cities, but 10 prominent ones. That's why it was called Decapolis. So if you think about a map, and why I don't have one, I can't explain it to you. But if you think about the Sea of Galilee, Decapolis is to the southeast of Galilee, so it's beyond the Jordan River, but it's to the south. That's kind of where the area of Decapolis is. But he also says, and beyond the Jordan is going to mean kind of all of that region that's not just Decapolis, but also south. So it's a large, large area. People are really getting what? People are really getting what? Excited. They're really getting excited. I mentioned in your notes, if you think about the person in the Old Testament who had come just even close to, it's kind of hard when you start talking about who worked the most miracles in the Old Testament. It's usually an answer that you don't think of. Moses. Because in a sense, Moses ushered in what? Each one of the 10 plagues. And those were all miracles of judgment, of destruction. Whereas Jesus' miracles were miracles of healing, miracles of mercy, miracles of compassion. And people were just responding, and it's becoming just an extremely astounding reaction to it. And we're going to see this. We will see this building up. When you start marking his personal work through years, year 1, which is what we're in, year 1 is the year where everything is growing and everything is building steam. More and more people are coming to him and are following him. The numbers are great. And most people, what would most people say about that? What would most people say about increasing numbers, more followers? They would say, the more you've got, the better you are. And Jesus said that for a while. And then it's not like society changes underneath him. Jesus put a decided stop to it. And we'll get to it. I won't tell you where it is before we get to it, but it was the Lord himself who put a stop to it and kind of drove away the ones that weren't there for the right reason. Right. And so for this fad, there was going to be a day of reckoning. And there was. But not at this moment. Now it's growing and growing and growing. Let's go to Mark chapter 1, verse 40. And let's look at this leper. Mark chapter 1, verse 40. Why was leprosy so bad? Oh, for one thing, it separated you from everyone else. I should have done a little bit more of a deep dive of it, but how do you cure people from leprosy today? Antibiotics. And again, I think we talked about this. Did we talk about this in class last week? How long have we had antibiotics? World War II. I mean, can you believe it? And as long as human beings have walked on the face of the earth, we've had antibiotics until just at the time of World War II. So if you got sick before that, you just rolled the dice, and hopefully you made it through it. And that's what a leper had to do. They just hoped that they made it through it because there wasn't anything that you could give them. So Mark chapter 1, verse 40, now a leper came to him, and what did the leper do? Yes, kneeling down to him and saying to me, and I like this. This was very impressive. In verse 40, he doesn't, I guess, maybe you see too much in words, but he doesn't ask him, Lord, would you please heal me? What does he say? If you're willing, you what? You can make me clean. So right off the bat, he manifests what? Faith. If you're willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus moved with what? Moved with compassion. Stretched out his hand and touched him and said, I am willing, be cleansed. And as soon as he had spoken, immediately, remember, Mark is a short gospel, but it's shortened because it emphasizes immediate power. Mark is written to the Romans, and what appealed to the Romans was that sense of power and authority that Jesus had. When Jesus healed, it wasn't, come back in 2 months and let me check you again and let's look at the progress. When Jesus healed, immediately he was made well and he was cleansed. But in verse 43, this is the first time this happens, and it's going to happen a few times. What does he tell him? See that you say nothing to anyone, but go your way, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing those things which Moses commanded as a testimony to them. However, he went out and did what? Exactly the thing that Jesus asked him not to do. However, he went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the matter so that Jesus could no longer openly enter the city, but was outside in deserted places, and they came to him from every direction. Okay, so in verse 43 and 44, don't say anything to anyone. So why? And there's... So he wants to prevent a crowd, because with the crowd you can't what? So first of all, your work is not as effective. But also, if the crowd comes along and the crowd is growing too fast, then it's easy for all of this to just degenerate into what? the, the the horse-drawn wagon, Jesus Christ healing show, and he just rolls into town. That's all he does, just a bunch of miracles, and he just rolls out of town to the next town. It becomes what? It just becomes the performance. I put in your notes, it becomes basically a social gospel. It becomes a social gospel, something that is designed to help the outer man. And hopefully in helping the outer man, we'll get to the inner man. And that's not what the Lord's intent was. So you say nothing, but I do want you to go to the priest. And why did he want him to go to the priest? And that testimony to them would have actually been very, very powerful. Because presumably this man would have had to have gone, kind of checked in with the priest occasionally so that they could have ceremonially, I don't want to say cleansed him, but ceremonially taken care of him the best that the Old Testament law allowed while you had leprosy, which is very interesting because Charlie had brought this up, that it separated him. So when we come into contact with Jesus, we don't defile him. He does what? He cleanses us. So here were these priests, and these priests likely had ministered to this man, and Jesus wanted to make sure that they had a testimony of who Jesus was. Well, what better testimony would be than for someone with this chronic, in every other case, this chronic, lifelong case, to then be able to see he's not just better, not just a couple of spots have shrunk a little bit. Jesus did what? Just made it go away. Denise. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. If I remember right, leprosy was like frostbite. It likes the soft tissue, so noses and ears and fingertips, and so yes, and he could have not just taken away the skin defection, but also could have literally, as the gospel writers mention it sometimes, made him whole, restored it. Can you imagine what it would have been like to see some? You knew what they were like. You'd known them all your life. You'd passed them 1,000 times in the street, and then all of a sudden, the next day, there they were, completely healed, with no rational explanation to it, other than what? He happened to catch Jesus and told him, if you're willing, you can make me clean. It's just fantastic. And this stuff, these episodes are just fantastic because there are just so many of them that come along to show how Jesus, with his act of compassion, which is mentioned here, changes so many people's lives and builds their faith. And we take these accounts, we take this information out, and that's what we try to do with people too. Okay, next time we will look at an important miracle next time, and that's the 4 friends who were letting down their sick friend through the roof next time.